A CEO goes undercover in his own store. What he discovers will leave you stunned. The sharp chime of a store door opening echoed through the small convenience shop in Clearwater, Florida. A man in a navy polo and worn jeans stepped inside, his cap pulled low over his forehead. He glanced around casually, but his eyes were anything but ordinary. This wasn't just a customer looking to grab a soda or a snack. This was Elijah Daniels, the CEO of Everyday Essentials, a multi-million-dollar chain of convenience stores spanning the southeastern United States. But today, Elijah wasn't walking into his store as the boss. He wasn't there to shake hands or pose for a PR photo. Instead, he wore a name tag that read Mike, trainee, and carried a sense of purpose that weighed heavier than the clipboard tucked under his arm. Over the past few months, anonymous complaints had trickled into the company's customer service hotline, all pointing to one specific store. Customers described rude interactions and a lack of care from employees. A pattern began to emerge, something Elijah couldn't ignore. This was more than just a bad day here and there. Something was off. Elijah didn't build his company on flashy ads or aggressive expansion. He built it by prioritizing people, employees and customers alike. Treat your people right, and they'll take care of the business, his late father had always said. Elijah lived by that advice, but if this store had become a weak link, he needed to know why, and he needed the truth, not the polished version his managers might present at a corporate meeting. As he moved toward the back of the store, Elijah's eyes scanned every detail. The shelves were neatly stocked, the floor swept clean, and the faint smell of freshly brewed coffee wafted from the corner cafe station. It all seemed fine at first glance, but Elijah knew better. A store's atmosphere wasn't just about appearances. It was about the energy, the people. A cheerful cashier at the counter greeted customers with a practiced smile. But there was something detached in her tone, as if she were reading from a script. A younger stock clerk in the snacks aisle stacked chips mechanically, barely glancing at customers who passed by. It wasn't overtly bad service, but it felt hollow, like something essential was missing. And then, there was the manager. Elijah hadn't introduced himself yet, but he'd already noticed the man barking orders from behind the register, his words sharp and hurried. A customer had asked for help finding an item, and the manager had waved her off with a dismissive, "It's over there somewhere." Elijah's stomach tightened. This wasn't the level of care he prided his company on. He stepped behind the counter, pretending to study the outdated register system. The young cashier next to him, a woman named Jordan, glanced at him skeptically. "First day?" she asked, her tone laced with disinterest. Elijah nodded, forcing a nervous smile. "Yeah, just learning the ropes." Jordan shrugged. "It's pretty straightforward. Just smile and ring people up. Don't let anyone bother you too much." Her words were casual, but something about the way she said bother made him wonder what she meant. Elijah continued to observe in silence, playing his role as the new guy. But his heart raced. He hadn't been in disguise for long, but already he felt a storm brewing. Something was wrong here, he could feel it. And he was determined to figure out exactly what it was. But Elijah didn't realize just how much the next few hours would change everything he thought he knew about his company. Elijah Daniels wasn't your typical CEO. At just 45 years old, he had built Everyday Essentials from the ground up. What had started as a single convenience store in Tallahassee had grown into a network of over 150 locations across the southeastern U.S. His philosophy was simple. Every customer and employee deserved to feel valued. To him, it wasn't just about sales or market share. It was about community. It wasn't always easy. Elijah had faced his fair share of challenges, from navigating economic downturns to weathering storms, literally. A few years back, Hurricane Michael had devastated several of his stores. But through it all, Elijah made it a point to lead by example, often showing up to personally assist with cleanup efforts. Employees respected him because he treated them like family. That's why the recent complaints hit him so hard. It started with an email forwarded by the customer service team. A woman wrote about being ignored by employees and feeling unwelcome at the Clearwater location. Elijah had brushed it off as a one-off incident until more messages followed. Customers described rude cashiers, apathetic staff, and a manager who seemed more interested in his phone than his job. Elijah had heard enough. He arranged for his head office to send out a secret shopper to the store. Their report only confirmed what Elijah feared. This wasn't just 1 or 2 bad days. The store had an ongoing issue with employee morale and customer service. The troubling part? On paper, everything looked fine. The store met its sales targets. There were no reports of theft or major complaints from employees. But Elijah knew better. Numbers didn't tell the full story. Numbers can hide cracks, he muttered to himself during a late-night drive home, the windshield wipers swiping furiously against a sudden downpour. Elijah decided to go undercover. It wasn't the first time he had done something like this. Early in his career, he had disguised himself as a customer to better understand the experience his stores offered. But this time felt different. This wasn't just about improving processes or gathering data. It felt personal. He thought back to his father, a small-town grocer who had taught him everything he knew about running a business. "The minute you stop listening to people, you've already failed," his father had told him. Elijah carried those words like a badge of honor. So, one quiet Tuesday morning, he parked his truck a few blocks away from the Clearwater store, slipped on his Mike name tag, and walked inside. His plan was simple: blend in, observe, and figure out what was really happening. Within minutes, Elijah realized this wasn't going to be easy. The staff seemed disengaged. Customers weren't greeted with the warmth Elijah expected, and the manager's authoritative tone made the team appear more like cogs in a machine than people working together. Still, Elijah wasn't ready to pass judgment. He knew better than to make snap decisions. People often acted differently under stress or when they felt misunderstood. He needed to dig deeper. As he stocked shelves and bagged items for customers, Elijah noticed small details others might have missed. The cashier, Jordan, seemed tired, her movements slow and deliberate. The stock clerk barely spoke to anyone, even when asked a direct question, and the manager, busy scrolling on his phone, acted more like a detached overseer than a leader. Elijah reminded himself to stay focused. He wasn't here to criticize, he was here to understand. But something told him that the truth he was searching for wouldn't be easy to uncover. Little did he know, one offhand comment was about to blow everything wide open. Elijah took a deep breath as he adjusted the cap on his head and stepped behind the counter. He had spent the last hour quietly stocking shelves, observing the rhythm of the store. Now, it was time to see things from the front lines. Jordan, the young cashier, gave him a brief glance before returning her attention to the screen in front of her. "You'll be fine," she said flatly, sliding a pack of gum across the scanner for a customer. "Just scan and bag, don't overthink it." Elijah chuckled nervously. "I'll try not to mess up." Jordan didn't laugh. She didn't even look at him. Instead, she handed the customer their change and waved them off without so much as a smile. The next customer, an older woman with a cart full of items, stepped up. Elijah followed Jordan's lead, mimicking her movements as he rang up groceries. He tried to make small talk with the woman, asking if she'd found everything she needed. The woman smiled warmly. "Oh, yes, thank you. You're new here, aren't you?" Elijah nodded. "First day." She leaned in slightly. "Well, I hope you'll stick around. This place could use more people like you." The comment caught him off guard. Before he could respond, Jordan interrupted. "Ma'am, do you want your receipt in the bag or not?" Her tone was sharp, her expression bored. The customer hesitated, then muttered, "Yes, please," before walking away. Elijah felt a knot form in his stomach. He hadn't been undercover for long, but he was already starting to understand why customers were unhappy. Jordan wasn't outwardly rude, but her lack of warmth made interactions feel transactional, cold. Still, Elijah reminded himself to keep an open mind. People had bad days. Maybe Jordan's was one of them. As the morning went on, Elijah continued to observe. The pattern was consistent. Customers were treated with indifference at best, annoyance at worst. The younger stock clerk, whose name tag read Luis, avoided interacting with anyone unless it was absolutely necessary. When a customer asked him for help finding an item, he pointed vaguely toward an aisle without even looking up from his work. And then there was the manager, Carl. He spent most of his time either barking orders or scrolling on his phone behind the counter. At one point, a customer approached him with a question about a sale item. Instead of answering, Carl sighed and said, "If it's not on the shelf, we're out. Check another store." Elijah's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to stay in character. He noticed something else, too. The employees weren't just indifferent to customers, they were indifferent to each other. There was no camaraderie, no teamwork. Everyone seemed to be operating in their own bubble, doing the bare minimum to get through the day. During a lull in activity, Elijah leaned over to Jordan. "So, how long have you been working here?" She shrugged. "A year, maybe? Feels longer?" "Do you like it?" Jordan snorted. "It's a paycheck." Elijah nodded slowly, filing her answer away in his mind. Just then, Carl walked over. "Mike, right?" he said, glancing at Elijah's name tag. "Go clean up the coffee station. Someone spilled something." Elijah nodded and made his way to the corner of the store. As he wiped down the counter, he overheard Carl muttering to Jordan. "New guy's too eager," Carl said with a laugh. "Bet he'll burn out in a week." Elijah's hand froze mid-wipe. The words stung more than he expected. He wasn't just hearing Carl's opinion of Mike the trainee. He was hearing the mindset that had likely seeped into every corner of this store. But Elijah was only beginning to uncover the real story behind the complaints. By early afternoon, Elijah had fallen into a steady rhythm. He scanned, bagged, stocked, and even handled a few minor spills. The physical labor wasn't a problem. He'd started his career doing this exact kind of work. But the atmosphere in the store weighed heavily on him. Customers came and went, and the same patterns repeated. A lack of warmth, disinterest, and employees who seemed like they were counting down the minutes to the end of their shift. Elijah kept his interactions professional but friendly, quietly noting everything. Then it happened. A man in his late 50s approached the counter holding a bag of chips and a lottery ticket. He wore a faded blue cap and moved with the slow, deliberate steps of someone who'd seen a hard day's work. Elijah greeted him with a polite, "How's it going?" and began scanning his items. "Could be worse," the man replied, giving Elijah a faint smile. Jordan, standing next to him at the counter, glanced at the man's worn boots and added, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Looks like it already is." The man froze. Elijah froze. For a moment, the entire store felt like it had gone silent. The customer's face turned red, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Jordan. "Excuse me." Jordan shrugged, a smirk playing on her lips. "Nothing, just saying." Elijah felt his pulse quicken. He forced a smile and quickly handed the man his change. "Here you go, sir. Have a great day." The man muttered something under his breath and walked out, shaking his head. Elijah turned toward Jordan, trying to mask his anger. "Was that really necessary?" he asked quietly. Jordan rolled her eyes. "Relax, Mike. People like him don't care. He's probably just here to blow his paycheck on scratch-offs anyway." Elijah's chest tightened. He wanted to say something, wanted to confront her, but he stopped himself. If he revealed too much emotion, he might blow his cover. Instead, he clenched his jaw and walked away, pretending to adjust some items on a nearby shelf. But he wasn't pretending to listen. Jordan continued, this time speaking to Luis, who was restocking candy bars at the end of the aisle. "I swear, this place gets worse every day. Management doesn't care about us, so why should we care about these people? They're lucky we even show up. Louise grunted in agreement. Yeah, Carl doesn't do anything. And corporate, forget it. They just sit in their air-conditioned offices and tell us to smile more. Jordan laughed bitterly. Exactly. They're so out of touch. I mean, have they even been in a store like this? They wouldn't last a day. Elijah's stomach churned. He stepped into the stockroom, out of sight, and leaned against the wall. His disguise wasn't just hiding his identity. It was forcing him to swallow his pride and listen to criticisms that cut deep. He knew the culture of this store wasn't where it needed to be. He'd already seen enough to confirm that. But what stung more than the cashier's comment to the customer was what came next. The employee's perception of leadership. They think we don't care, Elijah whispered to himself, his voice barely audible over the hum of the stockroom refrigerator. He thought back to the long nights he'd spent crafting policies meant to support his employees, the bonuses he'd fought to approve, the training programs he'd implemented. Had it all been for nothing, or had something broken down along the way? Elijah took a deep breath and stepped back onto the sales floor, determined to keep observing. But deep down, he knew he couldn't stay silent for much longer. The situation was about to come to a head, and it would leave everyone in the store reeling. Elijah spent the next hour going through the motions, but his mind raced. He couldn't shake the sting of what he'd overheard. Jordan's dismissive attitude toward customers and Louis's jaded remarks about corporate weren't just isolated moments. They reflected a deeper problem, one that started with leadership. Still, he needed more. Something told him this wasn't just about a few bad employees or even a bad manager. There was a bigger story here, and Elijah was determined to uncover it. As the afternoon slowed, Carl called everyone to the back for a quick team meeting. "Mike, you stay up front," he barked, gesturing toward the register. Elijah nodded, but lingered close enough to catch snippets of the conversation. "All right, guys," Carl began, his tone exasperated. "Corporate's been breathing down my neck about these customer complaints, so let's try not to screw up too much, okay? Smile or whatever. Just don't give them a reason to call in." Jordan snickered. "Why bother? It's not like they care about what we say." Carl shot her a look, but didn't respond. Instead, he continued. "And if any of you are thinking about taking a day off this week, forget it. We're short-staffed as usual, so I don't want to hear any excuses." Elijah's chest tightened as he listened. The tone of the meeting wasn't motivational or supportive. It was dismissive, transactional. Exactly what he'd seen reflected in the staff's attitudes. When the meeting ended, Elijah waited until Carl passed by before following him into the stockroom. "Hey, Carl," he began, keeping his voice steady. "Mind if I ask you something?" Carl turned, looking annoyed. "What is it, Mike?" "I overheard part of the meeting," Elijah said, careful to sound casual. "Do you think the team feels supported? Like, do they trust corporate to have their backs?" Carl scoffed. "Support? Trust? Look, Mike, this isn't some cushy office job. People come here to get paid, not to feel warm and fuzzy." "But don't you think how they feel impacts how they work?" Elijah pressed. Carl rolled his eyes. "You're new, so let me spell it out for you. Corporate makes the rules, and we're just here to enforce them. If people don't like it, they can leave. Simple as that." Elijah stared at him, his frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. "What about the customers? Don't they deserve better?" Carl shrugged. "Customers want cheap prices and fast service. That's it. They don't care if we smile or not." Elijah clenched his fists at his sides but forced himself to stay calm. He had seen enough. Later that day, as the staff began winding down for closing, Elijah decided it was time to break his silence. He stepped behind the counter, his name tag still reading Mike, and addressed the team. "Hey, everyone. Can I have a minute?" Jordan looked up from her phone. Louise paused mid-shelf restock, and Carl crossed his arms, visibly irritated. Elijah took a deep breath. "I know I'm new here, but I've noticed some things today. Things I think we need to talk about. Jordan rolled her eyes. Here we go. Ignoring her, Elijah continued. I heard what some of you said earlier, about customers, about corporate, about how you feel working here. And I get it. You're frustrated. You don't feel heard or valued. But what if I told you I'm here to change that? Carl raised an eyebrow. What are you talking about? Elijah removed his name tag, letting it drop onto the counter. My name isn't Mike. I'm Elijah Daniels. I'm the CEO of Everyday Essentials. The room fell silent. Jordan's jaw dropped. Louise froze mid-step. Even Carl looked momentarily stunned. I came here undercover because I needed to see things for myself, Elijah said, his voice steady but firm. And what I've seen, what I've heard, tells me we've lost sight of what this company stands for. But I'm not here to point fingers. I'm here to fix it. The silence stretched for a moment before Carl scoffed. So what now? You fire us all? Elijah shook his head. No, this isn't about punishment. This is about understanding what's broken and how we can fix it together. He turned to Jordan. When you said earlier that management doesn't care, that hit me. Because if you feel that way, it means I haven't done my job as a leader, and that's on me. Jordan shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Elijah addressed the team as a whole. I can't promise change overnight, but I can promise you this. I'm listening, and I want to hear from you. What's really going on here? What do you need to feel supported, to take pride in your work? The room was still tense, but something in the air shifted. A door had been opened, and there was no turning back. The silence hung in the air, heavy and uncertain. Elijah looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each employee. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, to his surprise, Luis was the first to step forward. You really want to know what's going on, Luis said, his voice tinged with frustration. We're overworked, understaffed, and no one seems to care about how hard it is to keep this place running when we're stretched so thin. Jordan crossed her arms but nodded. Yeah, and we're told to smile more, but how are we supposed to do that when Carl's on our case 24/7? No offense, she added, glancing at the manager. Carl sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I get it, I do. But I'm under pressure too. Corporate's always breathing down my neck about numbers. If I don't hit targets, my job's on the line. Elijah listened intently, his expression calm but serious. I hear all of you, he said, and I'll admit, hearing this directly from you is tough. I thought the policies we've put in place were enough. Clearly they're not. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Here's what's going to happen. First, I'm going to sit down with every single one of you, individually, over the next week. I want to hear your concerns, your ideas, and what you think needs to change. Second, we're going to implement changes immediately. More staff to lighten the load, better communication, and training programs that focus on supporting both employees and customers. Elijah turned to Carl. And Carl, I need you to step up. Leadership isn't just about enforcing rules, it's about setting the tone. If your team doesn't feel supported, they can't succeed. And if they can't succeed, neither can the store. Let's figure out how we can help you lead better too. Carl hesitated, then nodded. Fair enough. I could use some help. The tension in the room began to ease. Jordan looked at Elijah, her skepticism softening into something closer to hope. You really mean all that? She asked. I wouldn't be here if I didn't, Elijah replied firmly. In the weeks that followed, Elijah kept his word. Staffing schedules were adjusted, new training programs were introduced, and management underwent leadership workshops. Slowly but surely, the atmosphere in the store began to change. Employees started working together as a team. Customers noticed the difference too, leaving positive feedback that filtered back to Elijah's office. But what stayed with Elijah the most was a comment from Jordan during one of their one-on-one conversations. "You showing up like that, it reminded me that someone actually cares," she said quietly. "It made me want to try again." Elijah left the store that day knowing he had done more than just solve a problem. He had reignited a sense of purpose, not just in his employees, but in himself. To anyone watching this, take a moment to reflect on the spaces you work or interact in. Are you listening? Are you paying attention to what people need, not just on the surface, but underneath? Leadership isn't about titles or policies, it's about connection. Whether you're a CEO, a manager, or just part of a team, remember this: real change starts when we care enough to listen.